So I want to welcome everybody again, and everybody online and at home, and on your recordings. We are so blessed to have Swami Medhanandaji here from the Vedanta Society of Southern California, Hollywood Temple, right now, resident. He's been here all weekend. This is his third and final talk. But I love the title that Swamiji gave us, Fake It Until You Make It. So Swamiji, and maybe you can mention too something about Diwali. Blessed Diwali to everybody.
Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarva dhamma swarupini avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namah. Om asato ma sakkamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the transient to the eternal. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Happy Diwali, everyone. So that last mantra I just chanted, and Jeff also did it earlier, one of our ancient Upanishads, and there's part of it's a prayer. And the prayer is to lead us from darkness to light, from death to immortality. And I think that is the main significance of Diwali. It's the festival of lights. Metaphorically, light here is divinity, the triumph of our divine nature over our selfish nature, our animal nature. And in Hollywood, we'll be celebrating Kali Puja tomorrow all night. So I'm rushing back before then. And it's a wonderful puja, and yeah, it's all about surrendering to Divine Mother. That's it. That's the essence and the culmination of spiritual life. Thinking of God as mother is so pure and so beautiful, because who loves us more than a mother? So God, thinking of God as mother, this is something that to Christian ears sometimes it sounds odd. But of course, in Catholicism they have Mother Mary. But it's in India, Mother is celebrated as divine. That's been done for millennia. It's a very powerful practice. Sri Ramakrishna at one point said, the purest of all attitudes that one can have as a spiritual aspirant is the attitude of a child toward his or her mother. So that's the attitude we should try to cultivate, especially on this very auspicious occasion of Diwali. So, let's get into the topic. Fake it till you make it. So some of you have actually been with us the whole weekend. You know, I give a little bit of background about my own journey. Can we turn down? Just it feels a little stuffy in here.
Of course.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I spent 13 years in India, 2009 to 2022, and 11 of those years, those blessed years, were in Beluma, which is the global headquarters of our order. And I was at a university, and our meditation would be at 4 a.m. And then after that, the only time to exercise, because it's so hot in India, it's a tropical country, so the only time I could sneak it in is before sunrise. So it was around 5:15 in the morning. I would go for a jog. You know, we have this kind of private road area where I would do it. And then I'd come back, and I swear on cue at 6 in the morning, pretty much at 6 in the morning every day, I got back to my room and I would hear hysterical laughter coming from somewhere. Here at once, it's like, okay, India is a big country, it's overpopulated, and so people are laughing, that's fine. But every day at the same time, I hear this hearty laugh, ha 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 ha, and it's a group of people. I was really puzzled. I made some inquiries and I found out that there's a laughing club right behind our university, apparently. And then I found out that this was kind of widespread throughout India, that this is like a thing. I don't know if it's still a thing. I think it still is, but maybe not quite as popular as it was when this is back in 2010. It's quite fascinating, and I looked this up and I found out, and you go on YouTube, you type in Laughing Club India, and you'll find some really interesting videos, actually. So what's the idea here? What are these people doing? They come together at a fixed time and they start laughing together, smiling and laughing together. Why? These people swear by it. And they've done interviews on these people. They say, why? Why do you do this? It seems so artificial, so weird. They say, we love it. It makes us happy. Even if they're in the doldrums, they're not feeling good, they start laughing together. And there are physiological effects and neurological effects just from literally the act of smiling and laughing. There's an intimate connection between body and mind. We all know that when we're happy, we naturally smile, right? And when other people see us, they can tell we're happy. But the opposite is also true. By forcing us to smile, forcing ourselves to smile, even when we're not happy, it'll trigger certain chemicals in the brain, dopamine, serotonin, and then it'll make us happy. So there's this beautiful positive feedback loop that goes on, where there's an intimate connection between body and mind. When the mind is happy, it naturally reflects a certain kind of happiness that's reflected at the physical level. We smile, we laugh, but the opposite is also true. And the more we kind of bring ourselves to be positive and literally reflect that at the physical level by smiling more, we'll become happier as a result. And there are scientific studies proving this, actually. There's also a field of science called psychoneuroimmunology. If any of you have heard of this, it's quite interesting. Psycho means mind, right? Neuro means the brain. So psychoneuroimmunology means how the mind and the brain how the state of the mind and the state of the brain can affect the state of our immunity, how it can either weaken or strengthen the immune system. It's very interesting. They've done a lot of interesting work on this. So one doctor in this field of psychoneuroimmunology, his name is Murray Grossan, Grossan. And he says, it has been shown over and over again that depression weakens our immune system, while happiness has been shown to boost our body's immunity and resistance to diseases. And a very potent way, a powerful way of boosting our immune system is just by smiling and laughing. It's a fact. And this is great in our tradition because one of our main scriptures is the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And this is so far from a dry spiritual text that on every page, actually one of the most common expressions you find in there is all laugh. Everyone laughs. Sometimes it's hysterical laughter. He was a very jolly saint, and he would always be cracking jokes. And so just by reading the gospel, it'll bring a smile to our eyes. And it's healthy for us at all levels, at the physical level, at the emotional level, at the mental level, at the spiritual level. Okay, so that's really important. So I think, why do I bring this up? Because this whole idea of even when we're not happy, we should just try to smile anyway. Force a smile. We'll become happier as a result. Okay, so this is a good example. I think this is a good example of a fake it till you make it practice. We may not be happy, but by faking it, faking has connotations, right? So I don't want to push it too far. It's just a nice rhyme, fake it till you make it. But it's not faking. The idea is that you're not in a very positive state, but by engaging in, even at the physical level, in behavior that reflects a more positive attitude, ultimately you'll start developing the positive attitude. Because the body and mind are intimately connected. Okay. At Harvard, there's a social psychologist named Amy Cuddy. Have any of you heard of Amy Cuddy? Cuddy. She's done really interesting work on fake it till you make it practices. I think she's got a TED talk on this, which is quite interesting. And she came up with this really interesting experiment. So I have to give you the context first. What she noticed is that the majority of leaders, especially corporate leaders, because she works in the MBA school at Harvard as well, she noticed that most of them are men. And she wondered why. And what she found when she interviewed females in companies is that she found that often they tend to be nervous, that they tended to have lower self-esteem than their male counterparts, and that got reflected when they were up for kind of big job interviews for higher corporate positions. They often didn't get the job because they didn't project confidence. They didn't project the qualities of a strong leader. And so she did this really interesting experiment. What she did was she asked these women to adopt the Wonder Woman pose. What's the one? Does anyone know what the Wonder Woman pose is?
Yeah.
You hold your arms akimbo and your legs like this. I'm sitting. But anyway, when you're standing, you know how Wonder Woman stands. The famous Wonder Woman pose. Okay. So the experiment is she just tells them to hold the Wonder Woman pose for 2 minutes. That's it. Okay. And she is studying the brains as they're doing this. And what she found was astonishing. It's that the level of cortisol went way up. And cortisol is a stress hormone that helps us to deal with stress. And so we get less freaked out, even in stressful situations. And, so it reduced cortisol, not increased. It reduced cortisol to make us better able to handle stress. And it increased testosterone, which gave us this feeling of strength and confidence and high self-esteem. Okay. And remarkably, just by doing this, it made these women feel more powerful, stronger, have higher self-esteem, higher self-confidence, and they ended up doing better on these job interviews. If they did this before a big job interview, for instance, they ended up having better outcomes as a result. This is really fascinating. Another really good example of faking it till you make it, right? You don't need to feel powerful when you're doing it. Just do it. Force yourself to do it. Just the act of holding this physical posture will actually result in changes at the chemical and brain levels, at the neurological levels, that will make you feel more confident. Look at that, she's doing it now. Yeah. So it's quite remarkable. So what's the idea? It goes in 3 steps. This is based on Cuddy's research. Our bodies change our minds. So what our bodies are doing changes our mental energy. Our minds then change our behavior in this world. And then our behavior changes our outcomes. So if we project ourselves differently and behave differently, it's going to change the way that other people perceive us and our life outcomes. One thing that I thought about as a Vedantin is from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 17, verse 14. It's really interesting. 14, 15, and 16 of chapter 17. Bhagavan Krishna describes 3 kinds of austerity, tapas. One kind is bodily austerity, the second kind is verbal austerity, the third is mental austerity. Okay. And 14 describes Vangmayam tapa, which is verbal austerity. And it's really interesting. Deva, Dvija, Guru, Prajna, Pujanam. Okay, that's the first kind of physical austerity. You might think physical austerity means standing on one leg for 50 years and not eating anything for 5 weeks. And this is not the kind that, notice what Krishna says. The first thing is physically bowing down to those that you revere, whether that's your elderly people, whether it's your guru, whether it's God. Physically bending the knee is a form of physical austerity. This is something in the West especially important because Westerners aren't used to that. Like, why should I do that? But literally, just bending the knee itself has remarkable effects on brain chemistry and on the mind, actually. It makes you feel humble. Literally bending the knee. Another one is really interesting in the same. So, Deva Dvija Guru Pragya Pujanam. That's the first thing I just explained. Shaucham Ajavam. Ajavam. It's a really interesting word in Sanskrit. Literally means being straight, upright. Okay, but usually it's understood as a moral quality. As a metaphor, the idea is that you live a life of moral integrity, basically, right? What you say is aligned with what's in your heart. But why is that cataloged under physical austerity? That's the interesting thing. I think one way of, you can do the kind of Amy Cuddy reading of Bhagavad Gita. Ajavam is also, Bhagavan Krishna means it in a literal physical sense as well. Otherwise it wouldn't be under physical austerity, right? No, there's some people who have very good posture, They always keep their back straight. They walk with dignity. They carry themselves with dignity. They have a dignified bearing. There's some people who have, that actually affects the way, that creates dignity at the level of personality as well. And when somebody walks into a room with, with that kind of posture, it commands respect in a certain way. So everything matters, even the way that we carry ourselves at the physical level also matters. Okay? And Vedanta understood that thousands of years ago. Another example that I wanted to give you, I emphasize this a lot. I've given a whole talk called Spiritualizing Physical Fitness. And one thing I talk about in that talk is that there are a number of scientific studies done on people with mild to moderate mental health issues, depression, anxiety, and so on. And what they found is that regular physical exercise is 1.5 times more effective than prescription medicines in treating these mild to moderate cases of mental health issues. Very powerful, because when the body is healthy, the mind also gets healthy. There's this kind of virtuous feedback. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, it's called the upward. Let's see, I wrote it down. An upward spiral of motivation. Right. We talk about a downward spiral and hitting rock bottom, but there's also an upward spiral, fortunately. So this upward spiral of motivation. So we do physical exercise. We feel more motivated. We feel more energized. We have a more positive attitude throughout the day, and then we generally become happier people, and then we're more likely to get up in the morning and go for a physical exercise, and there's kind of a virtuous circle going on here. Body and mind. So a positive body, healthy body leads to a healthy mind, makes us more inclined to maintain a healthy body and so on. So I'm just giving you some examples of faking it till you make it, but the whole point of the talk is, I want to make the case that fake it till you make it practices are central and should be made central, if it's not already central, in our spiritual lives. So that's what I want to talk about today. First of all, before I get into it, there's a little disclaimer. Because of this phrase that some people fake it till you make it, that sounds weird. Why should we shouldn't be faking things in spiritual life. No, that's true. So let me clarify. So first of all, let me give you a much less catchy, but I think a little bit more accurate definition of what I mean by faking it till you make it in spiritual life. Do something or adopt an attitude that you know to be spiritually beneficial, even when you have absolutely no inner motivation to do so. Okay, which means that motivation is not coming from within. It doesn't feel natural. But as you engage in that behavior, you'll eventually develop a taste for that behavior. And ultimately, you'll become what you aspire to be. Following? I know that's a mouthful. So that's why I see fake it till you make it catchy. But, okay. So now, before we get into some of these fake it till you make it spiritual practices, I want to explain what it is not. Okay, faking it till you make it what it's not. We shouldn't get this confused with other ways of kind of doing it wrong. Okay, faking it till you make it in spiritual life is not about spiritual posturing. It's not about, oh, look at how spiritual I am. Okay, it's really important. Like, really, spiritual practice, it's for yourself, and it's between you and God. That's it. It's not for other people. And so the same thing goes for these fake it till you make it spiritual practices. The moment you find yourself projecting being very spiritual to other people, you're going in the wrong direction. Okay. The idea is it's a mental practice for yourself. That's the first thing to keep in mind. And just this is Swami Medhanandaji said something really interesting in this regard. He said, "Let us be true. 9/10 of our life's energy is spent in trying to make people think us that which we are not. That energy would be more rightly spent in becoming that which we would like to be." It's a very subtle, it's a deep psychological point, actually. Most people spend so much time trying to impress other people, trying to make other people think we're something that we're not necessarily, right? If we spend that energy in trying to be what we want to be, what we want others to think that we are, we become saints. So that's really important. Faking till you make it is not about spiritual posturing. Okay, that's the first thing. And secondly, this is a more subtle point. It's also not about self-deception, like deceiving yourself into thinking you're more spiritual than you already are. That's another great danger in spiritual life. That's why I gave a whole talk on self-deception in spiritual life. Okay, so this is not tantamount to self-deception. Just pretend you're already a saint and you'll become a saint. No, it's not that easy. Spiritual life isn't that. I wish it was, but it's not. Okay. So actually what we're going to find is the rest of the talk I'm going to be explaining some of these fake it till you make it spiritual practices. So what you're going to find is, first of all, that you have to be honest with yourself. That's the foundation of any fake it till you make it practice. Where do we stand now? Okay. Brutally honest self-assessment. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where am I on the spiritual path? That's really, really important. Okay. So I think that faking till you make it requires a fine balance of humility and honest self-awareness on the one hand, and at the same time, positivity and a kind of spiritual confidence on the other. that's what we're going to find. We have to strike that balance, and we have to keep in mind both these poles. Okay, we have to balance humility and self-awareness with spiritual positivity and a kind of confidence. Okay, so overall, what exactly is a fake it till you make it practice in spiritual life? What is its purpose? How does it work? The basic idea is, here's the underlying mechanism, and I'll explain the detailed practices in a second, but each of these fake it till you make it practices have the aim of purifying our minds. And through mental purification, through purification of heart and mind, what happens? Ultimately, we become what we want to be. Okay. Friedrich Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher, he had this great phrase. He says, "Becoming what we already are." Now, he didn't mean it exactly in a spiritual way, but we can co-opt it for our purposes and spiritualize it. Actually, Sri Aurobindo did the same thing with Nietzsche's concept of Superman. He had this idea of Übermensch in German, which means Superman, literally Superman. And he didn't mean it in a spiritual sense, but Sri Aurobindo was happy to take it and then give it a spiritual connotation, so we can do the same thing. Becoming what we already are. That's the ultimate consequence of engaging in these fake it till you make it practices. Okay. What are we ultimately in our deepest nature? We are divine, right? So that's why fake it till you make it is it's not based on a lie or some kind of illusion. We are in our deepest essence already divine. We're already perfect. We're already pure. And through these practices, we've just realized our innate perfection and our innate divinity. That's the idea. Okay. So it's a little ambitious, but I want to cover 9 fake it till you make it practices. Okay. But if I'm getting boring, just okay, but I hope it's not too boring. So the first fake it till you make it practice. This is the practice of how we can develop faith in God and belief in God. Okay, and I'll occasionally bring in Western religious figures as well, because I think that they're relevant. So here, I'm immediately reminded of a great Christian thinker and a great scientist named Blaise Pascal. Any of you have heard of him? Pascal's triangle. 1623 to 1662. He lived a very short life. Swami Medhanandaji. I think I will suggest that Pascal was one of the earliest Western fake it till you make it spiritual practitioners. Okay. And that he went so far as to realize God through the practice. And I'll give you evidence for that too. So let me read to you from Pascal's Pensées, which is a collection of his reflections in French. He says, "You would like to attain faith." He was a Catholic, by the way. "You would like to attain faith and do not know the way. You would like to cure yourself of unbelief and ask the remedy for it." So he's addressing unbelievers, right? People who are skeptics, atheists, agnostics. "Learn of those who have been bound like you and who now stake all their possessions. These are people who know the way which you follow and who are cured of an ill of which you would be cured. Follow the way by which they began, by acting as if they believed, taking the holy water, having the masses said, etc. Even this will naturally make you believe and deaden your acuteness. What have you to lose?" It's a really interesting passage. There's been a lot of research done on this, actually. It's a profound point. What is Pascal saying? He's like, look, I know it's not easy to believe in God, to have faith in God. Even if you don't, just get your butt out of that couch, go to church on Sundays, go through the motions of prayer and attending the Mass, taking communion if you're a Catholic, and so on, the holy waters and all that. And what will happen? Slowly, you'll start to develop that faith and that belief. Again, going back to that Vedantic point that Krishna makes in chapter 17 of the Gita, literally bending the knee has effects at the mental and spiritual level as well. Okay. At the same time, Pascal says, that by itself is not a self-sufficient practice. You have to couple, you have to make sure that your life is aligned with your spiritual practice, the rest of your life. So it's really important to ask yourself, not just what do I do in the meditation room, what do I do in the shrine, what am I doing outside of the shrine when I get out of the shrine, when I get out of the meditation room, when I'm interacting with other people, when I'm at work, how do I behave? Am I behaving spiritually even then? That's the real test. And so we have to make sure our life is aligned with our spiritual practice. That's why Pascal also said something very profound. He says, if you're not able to believe in God, he said the best way to increase your faith in God and ultimately to believe in God's existence, he says, is not by increase of proofs of God. So giving rational proofs and all that, that's all very intellectual, but that's not, it doesn't go deep enough. He says, but by lessening our worldly desires and attachments. This is Pascal, but it's pure Vedanta, right? So at the same time that we're going to the church on Sundays, we're going through the motions, even if we don't really feel any longing for Christ or any, we do that. At the same time, we should try to be reduce our worldly attachments and our worldly desires. They go hand in hand. And it's very potent if we can combine these practices, the fake it till you make it practice, with detachment and reducing our worldly attachments. And what happened in the case of Pascal? Some of you might know this. It's really fascinating. He died in 1662 at a young age. His servant discovered that in one of his coats, on the inside of the coat, it was sewn into it. There was a message sewn into it. And Pascal drew a cross, and then underneath the cross, he wrote these words about his realization of God, actually. And I'm reading it to you, what was sewn into his lapel. In the year of the Lord 1654, Monday, November 23rd, from about 10:30 in the evening until 12:30, fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of philosophers, nor of the scholars. Certitude, feeling, joy, peace. God of Jesus Christ, my God and thy God. Thy God shall be my God. Forgetfulness of the world and of everything except God. Greatness of the soul of man. Righteous Father, the world hath not known thee, but I have known thee. Joy, joy, joy. Tears of joy. Renunciation, total and sweet. Total submission to Jesus Christ and to my director. I will not forget thy word. Amen. It's beautiful. These are the words he wrote right after he had this extraordinary spiritual experience of Christ. And notice how Vedantic, all these things, forgetfulness of the world, that tremendous detachment toward everything in the world, renunciation, total and sweet, that has to go hand in hand with the faking it till you make it. But see the result is that he actually realized God. Now, coming closer to home, what does Sri Ramakrishna say? He says some pretty startling things sometimes in the gospel. One such statement is, one cannot even believe that God exists until one's heart becomes pure. I'll say it again. One cannot even believe that God exists until one's heart becomes pure. This is an extraordinary statement. Most of us, many of us, religious practitioners in any theistic tradition that believes in a God, we think we start with at least a minimal belief in God, some kind of, right? And a lot of people talk about God all the time. And yet, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Medhanandaji, and these other, many of them are saying, many people talk about God, very few actually believe in God. Believing in God in a deep sense is a high spiritual achievement, actually. You have to have a very pure mind and a very pure heart to really believe in God. You have to start from somewhere, right? But the purer you become, the more spontaneous, the more natural, and the deeper that belief in God actually becomes. So that's really important to keep in mind. Swami Vivekananda says the same thing in 1887, just after Sri Ramakrishna left his body. He says, so long as one has desires and cravings, worldly desires and cravings, one does not believe that God exists. What's the logic here? The idea is this: if you really believe that God exists, that there is a supreme, all-powerful, supremely loving being who loves us and takes care of us as even our own parents can't do, wouldn't we be leading our lives differently than we actually do? Right? And so an example that Sri Ramakrishna was fond of, that I also mentioned in his lectures, is God is like an infinitely powerful magnet, a giant magnet. And we, the soul, he likens the soul to a needle. And the needle, of course, is going to be naturally attracted to the magnet. The soul needle is going to be naturally attracted to the God magnet. Then why don't we feel that attraction? Why don't we feel that love for God, that bhakti, that faith, that belief? Sri Ramakrishna says, because there are these layers of mud caked over that needle. Impurities. Through spiritual practice, he says, but by praying to God with tears in your eyes, those tears will wipe away the mud caked over the needle. And the more those impurities are removed, what happens? That natural longing of the soul for God manifests. It's already there. On one occasion, a devotee asked Swami Vivekananda, that person asked, how do I cultivate bhakti? How do I develop devotion toward God, love for God? And he said, you don't need to develop it. You already are a bhakta. You already love God. We're all lovers of God. The problem is there's a layer of kama kanchana, lust and greed, covering over that innate love for God. So through spiritual practice, we purify our minds. We get rid of that dirt covering over our innate longing for God. And then we realize what we were all along. We're children of the divine. We're sparks of that divine fire. We already love God. We just don't know. Okay. So that's the first practice. Fake it till you make it in order to cultivate belief in God and faith in God. Another example. So second spiritual practice based on fake it till you make it. It really helps us to cultivate a particular spiritual attitude. What do I mean by spiritual attitude? The Sanskrit word I'm thinking of, it's the same word in Bengali. Bhava. Bhava. It's a term that Sri Ramakrishna uses all the time in the gospel. Okay. Although if you don't know Bengali, it might be harder to identify that. But often it's translated as spiritual attitude, sometimes devotional attitude. You can just watch out for that. But you'll find that's usually translated as, but that's the translation from bhava in Bengali. Okay. Sri Ramakrishna says that in order to make progress in spiritual life, ekta bhav ashray korte hai, which means you have to adopt a particular spiritual attitude. You have to pick the right one for you and then deepen that and just stick to it and try to deepen it as much as you can through spiritual practice. And then he says, in how many ways believers in the personal God enjoy him or her? They enjoy God through many different attitudes, these bhavas. The serene attitude, meaning shanta bhava, the attitude of a servant, dasya bhava, the attitude of a friend, sakya bhava, the attitude of a mother, vatsalya bhava. You can be the mother to God as your child. This is another beautiful attitude that you find in Hinduism. You can be the spouse of God, either husband or wife, like Radha was to Krishna. Sri Ramakrishna himself practiced this Radha bhava, this attitude of being Radha to a Krishna and realize God that way. And the lover of God as well, Madhura bhava. And he also adds, those are all kind of, you'll find that in Vaishnava traditions. He adds another one, because of course his Ishta Devata was a beloved Kali, Mother Kali. Of course we're going to celebrate Kali Puja tomorrow. And so he always said, I am child of Mother Kali. So what's that attitude? That's not found in Vaishnavism. Shantan bhava, Santana bhava. Shantan means child. The attitude of a child toward his or her mother. So that's another spiritual attitude. So now, a very important step in spiritual life, this should happen early on, ideally. You have to ask yourself, what spiritual attitude comes most naturally to me? And let's not all rush to imitate Sri Ramakrishna here and say, well, he adopted many bhavas, and so why can't we do that? One day we'll be a child of mother, the next day we'll be an Advaita, and the next. It's very dangerous to imitate Sri Ramakrishna. We're going to fall flat on our face. Okay, so let's not do that. Instead, it takes many, many lifetimes to attain mastery in one bhava. He was God himself, so that's a different thing. He's in a different category. So it takes us many lifetimes to attain mastery in one bhava. So the first step is figure out, identify what is our most natural bhava. Ask yourself, I don't even know if you, but ask yourself this question to yourself. Don't shout it, but that's between you and God. But what comes most naturally? You know, how do you look upon God? How do you see yourself in relation to God? As a child, as a friend, that's up to you, as a lover, right? And then identify that and then try to deepen it through your spiritual practice. That's really, really important. Okay. Now, even when you identify that doesn't mean that it's, you know, that you're always in that attitude, right? Often where we have different kinds of attitudes, much more worldly. When we lose our temper, what happens to it? All our devotion flies out the window, right? And this attitude of being a child of God or whatever it is, that's not always there. We're not able to stabilize it through the course of the day, right? So the spiritual practice is to try to stabilize that attitude, maintain that same attitude in the midst of all of your activities, in the midst of all the various circumstances Sri Ramakrishna taught this as a really powerful spiritual practice. He said, the attitude, try to maintain the attitude of bhakti ami, having the eye of a devotee throughout the course of the day. That I am a child of God. Try to maintain throughout the day. Even when you're interacting with your partner, even when you're interacting, raising your children, for instance, even when you're at work interacting with coworkers, if you're a leader in a company or something like that, or if you're a teacher, sometimes you have to scold your students, your employees, your children, right? But how do you maintain this bhaktirami, the eye of a devotee, even when you're doing that? It's not so easy. So you have to fake it till you make it. So keep trying to maintain it, right? And it may not be perfect at first, but slowly you'll get better and better at it. And one of the best ways, now this is a perfect segue from the second fake it till you make it practice to the third. One of the best ways to deepen and strengthen your natural spiritual attitude is through music. You know, we heard some beautiful songs. Krishna Das, he's one of these great devotional singers. And just by listening to his kirtans and by singing with him, it can really transport you. Why? Because music has a special power. So either when you're singing, but here's one danger. When you're singing, the danger is you might be more interested in singing for others, right? That's why Sri Ramakrishna's advice to all singers is sing for God. Pretend that, just imagine that your main audience is God. You're singing only for God. Even if you're in a room with 10,000 people, you're still singing for God, right? And another thing that it just occurred to me, or I was reminded of, is in Training Center in Viluman, one of our monastic teachers told us, he said, after having seen monks for many, many years, and how some of them have gone astray, he said, be very careful about two things in your monastic life. Number one is lecturing, so I'm in trouble. And then number two, singing. It's very interesting because he saw many monks who have beautiful voices. What happens? They sing and they start singing for public audiences, and devotees are, like falling over themselves. They're bringing tears. You're such a good singer. You're amazing. And then it can easily go to your head. It's very, very dangerous. And there have been cases of this. So that's just a little caveat on the side where just be careful about that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't sing in public, no. But just always remember when you're singing for God at the end of the day. And that's why listening to music is also very powerful. So whether you listen to devotional music or you yourself are singing devotional music, what happens when you do that? Well, what is devotional music? Just think, either in sacred classical music in the West or devotional music, bhajans in the Indian context. Take any song, like the Ramprasad song that Jeff sang for us. Okay. Every song embodies a particular spiritual attitude. You'll notice. You can analyze each song. You can identify what the attitude is. Okay. I'll give you an example, actually. Ramprasad's a great example because he loved Kali, and we're celebrating Kali now because of Diwali. Sri Ramakrishna said, Ramprasad achieved perfection through singing. One obtains the vision of God if one sings with yearning heart. Okay, Sri Ramakrishna, and this is one of his main practices. In the gospel, on almost every page, either he's singing a song and going into samadhi, or he's hearing a song and going into samadhi. It's a very, very powerful spiritual practice. And the idea is, many of these devotional songs are written by saints. I mean, these are poets who became saintly, who realized God through their musical practice, by singing. Because every song is a prayer, actually. You'll find that these songs are prayers to God, right? Adopting different attitudes. So I'll give you an example, but before I give you the example, I want to just mention that my favorite American poet is T.S. Eliot. I did quite a bit of work in grad school and undergrad on T.S. Eliot. And one of my favorite poems of his is Four Quartets. And there he talks about the spiritual power of music. And he talks about music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all. But you are the music while the music lasts. You are the music while even this idea of subject-object duality, that goes away. When you listen with perfect concentration to a piece of music, what happens? You start sharing the bhava of the singer, of the poet. Right? So even whatever we are, however worldly we are, whatever stupid things we've done, at least for those few minutes, those few moments, we feel identified with the spiritual perfected attitude of the saints singing that song. We become one with the singer. You were the music while the music lasts. Okay, that's the mechanism. I think all of us have felt that. That's why music naturally brings tears to our eyes. That doesn't mean that we're saintly, but we become saints for those few moments. And then the challenge is to try to maintain that attitude, in the course of our daily lives. And so Swami Vivekananda often said that one of the dangers of especially he found this in Vaishnavism, these traditions of dancing and ecstasy to music and all that. He says it's a great thing, but the danger is you when you go really high up because of these kirtans and all that. He says you can also come crashing down the next minute. There's emotional highs and lows, right? The highs go with the lows, and that's something we have to be careful about. And he said he saw some people going into ecstasies in church, and the next minute they're going into unseemly places. Let's just put it that way. Right afterward, So that's another thing to just keep in mind. Let me give you some examples. This is a song to Mother Kali, one of Sri Ramakrishna's favorites. He himself sings this song in the gospel. Rini might know this. Mago Anando Niranando Korona. It's a very beautiful song. The translation is, O Mother, ever blissful as thou art, do not deprive thy worthless child of bliss. And as I read the lyrics, try to identify what is the spiritual attitude. My mind knows nothing but thy lotus feet. The king of death scowls at me terribly. Tell me, Mother, what shall I say to him? It was my heart's desire to sail my boat across the ocean of this mortal life, O Durga, with thy name upon my lips. I never dreamed that thou wouldst drown me here in the dark waters of the shoreless sea. Both day and night I swim among its waves, chanting thy saving name. Yet even so, there is no end, O Mother, to my grief. If I am drowned this time in such a plight, no one will ever chant thy name again. Beautiful lyrics. To me, this is the attitude of a kind of pouting child to his mother. Pouting. You notice he's threatening her at the end. If you don't save me, Mom, nobody's going to take your name again. Notice that lesson. I never dreamt that you would drown me, Mother. Oh, no, sorry. Both day and night I swim along chanting thy Savior. Yet even so, there's no end, O Mother. Oh, if I'm drowned this time in such a plight, no one will ever chant thy name again. You drown me, no one's going to take your name. So what's the attitude? The attitude of a child, a pouting child, right? He attained perfection in that attitude through singing, with tears in his eyes, through singing as prayer. Actually, it's a very, very powerful practice. We can find the same thing in the Western context, in religious traditions like Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And I'll give you one example. My all-time favorite piece of Western classical music is a very obscure piece. His name is Dietrich Buxtehude. Have any of you even heard of Buxtehude? I'm not talking Bach or Mozart or Beethoven here. Buxtehude. He was a mentor to Bach, interestingly. Buxtehude. Okay. And my favorite song of all time on the Western side is a German piece called Herr, wenn ich dich nur habe, which means, oh Lord, oh Lord, if I have you alone. Okay. He puts to music, some of the greatest sacred classical music in the West comes from putting psalms to music, the psalms from the Hebrew Bible. Incredible, these poems. They're poems of ecstatic longing for God, in love of God. That's what these psalms are, if you actually understand the lyrics and appreciate them. And if you have a spiritual attitude when you read the psalms. And so he takes Psalm 73, 25 to 26 and puts it to music. And the lyrics are, Lord, Lord, if I have you alone, I do not care for heaven and earth here. If life and limb shall pass away, still you will always be, O Lord, comforting my heart. Still you will always be, O Lord, comforting my heart and my soul. So notice again, this is a song, it's a prayer directed to God and telling God, I want nothing but you, O Lord. And by listening to that song with concentration, you can really enter that spiritual attitude of just intense longing. Sri Ramakrishna said, the essential thing in spiritual life is to cultivate longing for God. Bakulata. Longing for God. music is one of the most powerful and one of the most painless ways to develop that longing for God, right? There are a lot of practices which are kind of like, music is like, it's something else. Another example of fake it till you make it. In the context of prayer, prayer is a very powerful practice in general, but I want to explain how faking it till you make it can play a role in our prayer practice. There are many different kinds of prayers, okay? And some prayers are prayers from the standpoint of being a struggling spiritual aspirant, okay? And there are other prayers where it's from the standpoint of a realized soul. It's very interesting, okay? In the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you're going to find both kinds of prayers. Sri Ramakrishna recommends different prayers, okay? So what's an example of the first kind of struggling spiritual aspirant? I'll give you an example. He says, Sharanagata, which means, oh mother, I surrender at your lotus feet. Ami Shadonhin, I'm a terrible spiritual aspirant. Bhajanhin, I have no devotion. Gyanhin, I've got no knowledge. Bhaktihin, I have no love for you, Lord. Right? So this is a very honest prayer. Like, right? You're not pretending to be anything. This is not faking until you make it. You're just like, warts and all, God, this is it. You know, this is how you made me, and this is how I am. But this is a powerful practice. And then you say, oh Lord, give me love for your lotus feet. And please don't delude me with your world-witching Maya. This is one of the standard prayers that you find in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Okay? That's the first kind of prayer. This is a very honest, heartfelt prayer from the standpoint of a struggling spiritual aspirant. Okay? But he also gives examples of a very different kind of prayer. Okay? One is, he says, this is his own prayer. He says, Sharanagata, again, I surrender to you, O Mother. Ami jontro tumi jontri. I'm a mere instrument in your hands, O Mother. You are the operator. Jemon korao temni kori. This is one of his favorite Brahmaprasad songs. I do as you make me do. Jemon bolao temni boli. I speak as you make me speak. Now, how is this a different kind of prayer? We don't really feel that in our, we can't. You know why? Sri Ramakrishna says, until you have realized God, you can't really feel in your heart of hearts, at the deepest level, that God alone is the doer. He says you have to attain jivan. You have to be a jivan mukta. You have to have attained enlightenment. You have to be liberated while still in the physical body to really feel that God alone is the doer. But even if we haven't realized God yet, by listening to these beautiful songs, which utter these prayers, at least for a few moments we can feel that. We get a glimpse of really feeling that we are just completely surrendered at the lotus feet of Divine Mother. Like the baby kitten that Sri Ramakrishna loved to talk about. Mm-hmm. That baby kitten who just says, meow, meow. And Mother Cat will just take it in its mouth and plop it wherever it feels. And the baby kitten is Elise father, right? It's because we don't have that attitude that we suffer. We try to rig things, right, in our favor. But if we can just completely surrender all our self-will, then we don't have any worries in the world. Mother will take care of us. That's the real significance of Diwali, actually, right? And so songs, again, and songs in the form of prayer, prayer in the form of song can really help us to cultivate that attitude. So even when the prayer is uttered from the standpoint of realization, we're not Ramprasad yet. We haven't realized God yet. We don't really know in our heart of hearts that God alone is a doer. And yet, by listening to music and by singing music that utter these words, these prayers, we can cultivate that attitude of total surrender and this feeling that we're just instruments in the hands of Divine Mother. Okay. Another example that I really like, this is in Hollywood, we do this once a month. We have Ramnam, beautiful Ramnam Sankirtanam, where we chant the name of Rama. Have you guys ever do that here? We don't. Okay. Maybe once in a while you guys do it. It's a wonderful practice. And you're a great singer, so you can do it. Just pick it up and you'll be and get Bilal involved.
Personally, I do it, but
no, it's great. Yeah. Sure. So one of my favorite parts of this is this beautiful, heartfelt 4-line prayer. Okay, Nanya Spreha Raghupati Hridaye Smadiye, and it goes on like that for 4 lines. And let me explain the meaning of it. Okay, the first 2 lines first. There is no other desire in my heart, O Rama, except for you. I speak the truth, Satyam Vadami, and you are the self in the hearts of all of us. Okay. So the first two lines, what kind of prayer is that? In these two, which category does that fall into? Is that stated from the standpoint of the struggling spiritual aspirant, or from the standpoint of somebody who has realized God? What do you think? Yeah, right? To be able to tell God, I have absolutely no desires in my heart except for you. How many of us can honestly say that? Probably no, honestly, because unless we realize God, we don't really feel that. But that's the first two lines, right, of the song. And then notice the third and fourth lines. Bhaktim prayacha. Let me read the translation. Grant me pure love for thee, O Rama, and free my mind from the stains of lust, anger, greed, and all the other selfish passions. That's interesting, isn't it? What kind of prayer is this? Third and fourth lines. The attitude of a struggling spiritual aspirant. In the same prayer, we get both the kinds of prayer. It's so interesting, right? So that's not saying that. So the first two lines, it's not that we should lie to God. It's not that. But by saying it in a heartfelt way, with tears in our eyes, with sincerity, we start to feel like that saint who really has no desires other than the desire for God. It's the same logic behind when you listen to that Buxtehude song. By the way, there's a beautiful performance of this on YouTube. Julia something or other. She's an American singer, I think. But just look up Julia and then Buxtehude, and you'll find the song. It's an amazing rendition of the song. You have to follow the lyrics to really appreciate it. Okay. We're on 5, so I've covered 4 practices. We have a few more to go here. 5 more to go. Okay. So another Vegetarian Mega practice. This has to do with meditation and japa. Okay. See, we all talk about meditation. There are 101 meditation apps, and we're very glib about meditation. But meditation, dhyana, the Sanskrit word is dhyana. Really meditating is a very, very hard thing, because it means the uninterrupted concentration on either God or your higher self. Basically, that's what meditation is. Uninterrupted. And the Indian metaphor that's used, the analogy is like an unbroken flow of oil being poured from one vessel into another. Unbroken flow of oil. We just had a meditation, right, for a few minutes or whatever. How many of us were able to just think of God for those 5 minutes? Almost nobody. The mind's going to wander in this direction and that direction because we have worldly desires and worldly attachments, right? So real meditation means the unbroken flow of thoughts going toward God alone or toward the self alone. Okay. But until we reach that point, we have to fake it till we make it. Right? So many of us have received initiation, and our guru will give us meditation instructions. Right? And he tells us how to meditate. Typically, what does that involve? We're given a mantra, so we should do mantra japa. We should repeat that mantra mentally in our hearts. And we should visualize the image of our Ishta Devata, the way that we like to think about God. Right? We're not having a God realization. We're not realizing God in our heart. It's an imagination. Right? And when we repeat the mantra, we may not be repeating it in a state of ecstasy, full of longing and devotion. No, it might even be mechanical. But that's the practice. And the Guru says, it doesn't matter how you're feeling, whether you're dry, you must do this twice a day. That's, at least in our tradition, it's morning, evening, every single day, without fail. Whether you're feeling like you're on the heights or whether you're in the doldrums, whether you're depressed, doesn't matter, but you got to do it because you have to fake it till you make it. And that imagination will ultimately turn into a reality because God is actually in our hearts. We just don't know it. So it's an imagination based on truth. That's the idea. Okay. Sri Ramakrishna says, the mind is like white linen just returned from the laundry. It takes on the color you dip it in. So the more you think of something, the more you take on the qualities of the thing you're thinking. That's why it's so good to come to these kinds of satsangas, to keep your mind high, to keep your mind on spiritual things. And reading spiritual scriptures and listening to spiritual music, all of this will, ultimately you become more and more sattvic, more and more spiritual, the more you immerse yourself in this dye of spirituality. Okay. Another quotation from the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna says, from constantly meditating on Krishna, Radha saw everything as Krishna. Moreover, she even felt that she herself had become Krishna. If a piece of lead is kept in a lake of mercury a long time, it turns into mercury. And then this is a folk kind of thing, which talks about Bengali folk thing. The cockroach becomes motionless by constantly meditating on the Kumira worm. This is very obscure. Meditating cockroach. This is interesting. Okay, so I'm going to say it again because it's pretty. The cockroach becomes motionless by constantly meditating on the Kumira worm. It loses the power to move. At last, it is transformed into a Kumira, into a worm. The cockroach. Similarly, by constantly meditating on God, the bhakta, the devotee, loses his or her ego. She realizes that God is she and she is God. When the cockroach becomes the Kumira, everything is achieved. Instantly, one attains liberation. So he's explaining a fake it till you make it meditation practice. We're not God, or we don't feel that we're God yet. But by meditating on God, the more we meditate on Sri Krishna, on any form of God that we love, any form of the divine, the more we start to absorb those divine qualities of the thing we're meditating on. And the more we become what we're meditating on, until we finally become one with God. And even that's not quite right. It's not that we say, what in the world? Okay. It's not even that we become God. We realize that we were already God. Right? So it's really important. We become what we already are. But it takes us all these lifetimes of spiritual practice to realize that. That's why also, interestingly, in the gospel, sometimes he gives cautionary advice in the opposite direction. He says, that's why don't dwell on negative things. And even, he says, in one place, he says, it's not proper for a good person to tell a lie or do something false, even in a dramatic performance. So imagine like Hannibal Lecter or something, like, Anthony Hopkins in Silence of the Lambs. Like, that can really mess you up. And he talks about it. I read an article of his where he talks about how it really like messed with his mind when he played Hannibal Lecter. Look at Heath Ledger playing Joker. He ends up committing suicide. I mean, it can really mess you up. So Sri Ramakrishna says, once I went to Keshav's house to see the performance of a play called Novo Vrindavan, the New Vrindavan. I saw an actor staggering and reeling in the role of a drunkard. And he says, it's not good for a devotee to play such parts. It is bad for the mind to dwell on such subjects for a long while. And then he brings up the same analogy. The mind is like white linen fresh from the laundry. It takes the color in which you dip it. If it is associated with falsehood for a long time, it will be stained with falsehood. Even if you know it's a character, right? And you're just acting. I'm just acting. I'm not actually a bad person. I'm playing a bad person. It can mess you up. Because and there are different kinds of acting methods, right? And so, but there are certain kinds which are maybe more dangerous than others, because then you start blurring the lines between reality and what you're imagining. But it's something that we should be careful about. And finally, with regard to japa, for instance, which is one of the main practices in our tradition, right? In the beginning, it might feel very mechanical. Our heart's not really in it, but still, our gurus say, do it anyway. And this reminds me of in Sri Ramakrishna's Leela, divine Leela, in his cosmic play, he brought along with him all sorts of characters, from the sublime to the ridiculous. And so one on the ridiculous side is Hazra, the great Hazra. So many of you who know the gospel will know that he makes these appearances in the gospel. And he lived with Sri Ramakrishna for so long, and yet he was, I don't know, I mean, he was not very well liked, to put it lightly. And it's so funny, Swami Medhanandaji had so much compassion. He would handpick the people that nobody else liked in the entire world and bring him to Sri Ramakrishna and say, you have to shower your affection on this guy. So he was best friends with Hazra. Okay, that's an aside. But Hazra, he had a big spiritual ego. And he had this superiority complex. And he would always be judging other people and rank ordering how spiritual other people are. And of course, he would end up as number one in the US News of most spiritual people. And one of the reasons is because he was always with his mala, with his japa beads, doing japa like this. And he thought himself very great because of that. And other people saw that he had this giant inflated ego, and that they're wondering, like, what's the point in doing all this japa? So that's an example of mechanical. You're doing the japa, but you're doing it mechanically, not just mechanically, but in a rajasic way. Sri Ramakrishna says, when you engage in spiritual practices, don't do it in a rajasic way, which means what? You're doing it in public, you're doing it in order to impress others and make other people praise you for being spiritual, right? And he'll often criticize the most spiritual people because they're more sattvic than he is. If you're very sattvic, you hide your spiritual practices and you hide your spirituality. And you might even project the opposite of what you really are. You know, you might come off as lazy. Other people won't know what he's doing, right? And now, by contrast, one day what happens is Sri Ramakrishna is noticing Hazra is doing this jump up mechanically like this all the time. He's doing this. He goes, give me those beads. He takes those beads in his right hand, and he tries to move the bead by repeating his own Ishta mantra, his own mantra, the Kali mantra. His fingers don't move. He can't move. He can't even turn the beads at all. So then he thinks, what do I do? In India, don't ask me why, but the left hand is considered unholy. She knows. She's laughing. You can ask me later after once the camera's up. Okay. Anyway, for whatever reason, people once brought him to. He was like a child, right? And so this devotee said, "Let's go to the zoo." There was a famous zoo in Kolkata. What happens? He's fine. The more you talk about sin, the more you can bind me. By repeating with grit and determination, I am not bound. I am free. One really becomes free. The wretch who constantly says, I am bound, only succeeds in being bound. That person who says day and night, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, in the name of God and can sin. How does he sit? How does he, like that? It's a very ordinary kind of question. How do we identify? How do we spot an enlightened soul? And interestingly, Krishna, his answer is not really a direct answer. He kind of ignores the terms of Arjuna's question because there are no physical characteristics. And so he just says, he says, when desires from your heart, then you have realized the highest. Then you become enlightened. And he goes on to explain all these internal spiritual qualities. And then Shankara says, he asks this question, okay, fine, those are the qualities of a realized soul. What are these qualities? Perfect mastery over the senses, perfect control of the mind, total detachment toward worldly things, no worldly desires or attachment, all these things. How does that help us? Great, right? But we're stuck here with all sorts of worldly attachments and desires. Shankara says something very profound here. He says, and let me try to read you the exact quotation here. He says, for in all scriptures without exception, dealing with spirituality, and we can generalize it beyond Hinduism. He's talking about Hindu scriptures, Vedanta scriptures, but we can apply to the Bible, to the Quran. Whatever are the characteristics of the person of realization, the enlightened person, are themselves presented as spiritual practices for a spiritual aspirant. Because these characteristics, these qualities, are the result of effort, self-effort. And those that are the disciplines requiring effort, they become the natural qualities of the enlightened person. So whenever we encounter a scripture and we find a passage describing the characteristics of a realized soul, the qualities of a realized soul, instead of saying like, well, great, but we're not there yet, so how does that help us? No, through effort, we should try to emulate them. Try to emulate their characteristics, and then that's faking it till you make it, right? If you think about that. And then ultimately, that becomes natural to us, right? Another example of faking it till you make it, image worship, right? I say I put it in quotes, but it's not true. It's a wonderful practice. But this is one of those practices in Hinduism that Christian missionaries and others will use it as a stick to beat us over the head. But it's a wonderful practice, actually. And let me give you some examples from our tradition. When the Brahma Samaj people, remember I mentioned the Brahma Samaj earlier, they didn't believe in image worship at all. They didn't believe in God with form at all. Okay, so and they kind of looked down on so-called idol worship as some kind of superstition or some kind of lower practice. Sri Ramakrishna realized God through image worship. He knew, and he saw Mother Kali in the form of, of the image of Kali. Not just that, there's so many other sadhanas where when this Vaishnava saint, mystic, named Jatadhari came to Dakshineshwar, he stayed with him for some time. And he kept a little image of the child form of Rama. And the child's name was Ramlal. Cute little boy, this image of a cute little boy. A metal image. And Jatadhari was realized, so he would be playing with that image as if it was living. Not because he was crazy, but because he actually saw it as living, because he was a realized soul. And Sri Ramakrishna, amazingly, also looking at the same image, was also seeing Ramlal, that child form of Rama, playing in exactly the same way. So this is a really extraordinary, I think possibly unprecedented incident where two great mystics are cross-checking each other's spiritual experiences, verifying that they're actually having a genuine spiritual experience of God. By looking at the same image, we're seeing it as ordinary people just as a metal image. They're seeing the child form of Rama playing pranks and running around and doing naughty things. It's amazing. Okay. Okay, so what does Sri Ramkrishna say about these practices? He says, as an imitation custard apple reminds one of the real fruit, so the divine images enkindle the presence of God. God is all powerful. It is possible for God to manifest in anything. Okay, so you have to be careful here. He's not just saying that the image reminds us of God, right? It does that, but it also is God. That's why M, the author of the gospel, toward the beginning of the text, before his ego was completely crushed, he was a little bit arrogant, a little bit of a holier than thou kind of attitude. And he says, why is it that these so-called Hindus, that they worship images? It seems kind of odd that they're worshiping clay. Sri Ramkrishna says, why clay? Chinmay Pratima. He says, these images are made of divine consciousness. And M is totally confused. He says, shouldn't we educate these people and tell them that they're worshiping clay, that they shouldn't be worshiping clay? And Sri Ramkrishna gives them a scolding. And he says, that's what you Calcutta people always are, you just want to lecture other people. But you're ignoring what about you? Save yourself before you save others. Because everything is God. If everything is God, how can those images not be God? And realized souls have realized God in the image. We're not pure enough to appreciate that. But through spiritual practice and by image worship, we can actually purify our minds. See the divine in the image. Okay. And then finally, actually there are two more here. I'll mention them quickly. Another one: fake it till you make it in the context of serving others. One of the main practices Sri Ramkrishna taught, I think we talked about this yesterday, maybe the day before, Shiva Gyane Jiva Seva.